And we can see one of the great attractions of Christendom was that you can look at it as an order of things, very coherent order of things, in which the religious outlook, the political structures, the moral compass that people shared, the culture, the art, etc., had this coherence. And there's naturally been a reaction among many people in the 20th century as this began to fall apart, saying we must above all return to that moral compass and the sense of order. We think of people like even law and so on. We have to ask the question, how in a given civilization, Christian civilization or other, how do people imagine the building of the kingdom, how the kingdom of God grows? And I think we had in Christendom, very understandably, a picture of the growth of the kingdom, which really became synonymous with the growth of Christendom. Right? The kingdom grows into a Christian civilization. The Christian civilization then expands through missionary activity or conquest of various Slavic tribes and so on. But and the eschaton would be that everybody would be in the great structure, right? There was something a little bit analogous developed as a, if you like, secular Enlightenment rereading of this in the progress story that comes from the Enlightenment. And as a matter of fact, if you look back to the beginning of the 20th century, it's rather unnerving to see how these two stories got interlinked, not so much in the Catholic world, but in the Protestant world. Think of the, Protestant United States, the world is becoming Christian, which means it's becoming democratic, which means it's becoming civilized, and everybody will become like us. But these were different stories, but they had this kind of interlink. Now, I think that the story that most is meaningful to people today is the one that starts from the mustard seed. And I'd like to give a reading of what I think that mustard seed image says in the Bible. Kingdom of God is like a mustard seed thrown in the ground, and then this great tree grows with birds nest in the branches. Now, I think that here we have a reading which is very different from either the Christendom reading or the progress story reading, because there is some kind of discontinuity between the act of planting the seed and the growth. This is great agricultural image which often occurs in the gospel, that God takes this up, and so I put the seed in, but the future, the development of that seed is not my doing. But I think what this can be understood, what's the great tree? I think the great tree that grows is not anything that is a continuing structure of human life. The great tree, and here I want to be wildly speculative, but you have to make some leaps here. The great tree is the very mysterious growth of human consciousness, of human moral aspiration. I mean, think of talking about this with Hansen, I think of the axial period, where at a certain point, this great discontinuity in very different parts of the world, where people normally focused on their own society and thinking of other societies as outside and possible enemies and so on, rise to some sense of universality, or of a notion of the good which goes beyond simply our society doing well. And in a specifically Christian context, you have the eruptions of holiness in various ways. St. Francis of Assisi, you can think of a great many examples, and they move outward. They get picked up elsewhere. But what you don't have is a continuous building of institutions in exactly the same sense. And if you look at the history of Christianity, there have been whole Christendoms that have disappeared. Nestorian, they've gone down. They've gone off the radar. Does that mean they're not relevant for us? No, I think on the contrary, they are all these are building towards something which only God can bring to fruition. But we can learn from them. It's very interesting that Dermot MacDonagh, in his wonderful history of Christianity, for the first time, I think, included in his scope all these different Christian churches in the story, and not just looking at the mainline development coming up to us, but looking at this whole Christian archipelago, I would put it this way, this archipelago in history, in time and space,